Welcome everyone. What a nice big group of folks we've got for the webinar this morning. And it's great to see some folks returning from the webinar series that have been with us all along, and a lot of new people on the call. And just really want to say thanks to all of you for taking some time to spend with us this morning. It's going to be, for me at least, a fun and interesting topic. Risk management is not always a fun topic necessarily. It can be heavy, and appropriately so. But today, we're not going to be talking about bad things that happen to people. We're going to be talking about things that almost happened, things that give us opportunities to learn, events that can be really valuable if we approach them the right way and recognize the opportunities that they give us. So for me, at least, it's a really fascinating and fun and kind of a light risk management topic that I hope is valuable and useful for you all as well. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know people are still kind of trickling in, but why don't we go ahead and proceed, and we'll let folks join us as they go. So we're going to talk today. Near misses are telling you something. Are you listening? And I am Steve Smith from Experiential Consulting. There is a quote here that I love. I gave a version of this talk recently for an Avalanche education conference, and I used this great quote by Sarah Carpenter from the American Avalanche Institute. And Sarah reminds us, the world of snow and avalanches is a wicked learning environment, and we don't get feedback every time we go out. I would suggest that the programs that all of you work in and the environments that all of you work in is also can be also a wicked learning environment. And the goal of this webinar is to talk about how do we get better at getting feedback every time we go out in that wicked learning environment. So just to make sure that we get an accurate assessment of who is on the call, let's just launch poll number 1, and I will invite all of you to quickly chime in here. What kind of a group is represented? What kind of group you are representing today? I apologize if your type is not reflected here. Looks like a lot of answers pouring in. 90% of you have responded. Awesome, 93. Okay, let's go ahead and end the poll, Amberly, and share the results. So lots of folks from various outdoor education programs, not a surprise. Nice to see wilderness therapy represented. Quite a few folks from conservation corps, schools and universities, some land managers, outdoor clubs, guide services, some associations and coalitions are with us, and a handful of folks that didn't neatly fit into one of our previous categories. So what a nice wide range of different kind of organizational types. And it's going to be interesting to me when we get into some of the more interactive places to see, how these concepts apply across all those different environments. So thank you so much. Great. So I know a lot of the people on the call, but there's quite a few people that I have not had the pleasure of meeting. So allow me a moment to introduce myself. I'm Steve Smith. I've been working in this outdoor education, outdoor program field for over 30 years. I've held leadership roles at Outward Bound, the Student Conservation Association, the Mountaineers, and other outdoor programs in the past. All that really set me up pretty nicely to have played a real wide variety of different roles in this industry over the years, from a field staff member to a program administrator to a board member. And one of the real highlights for me was the 3 years that I spent as the chair of the Wilderness Risk Management Conference, the WRMC. There's a nice shot of me down there in the bottom corner speaking to the crowd at the WRMC. And that's been a real meaningful part of my professional development and just relationships, and setting me up to launch Experiential Consulting, which I did all the way back in 2008. We're a risk management consulting company that based in Seattle that uniquely works with the outdoor industry in different facets. So all the different program types that you saw reflected in that opening poll are the types of different groups that we work with. And I'm lucky enough to work with Amberly, who is helping me host the call today, and another great, couple other great associate consultants in the company. So just a little overview of me and my background, and happy to answer any questions about that too towards the end. So let's get into the content, the reason why you came today. And before we start just diving in and talking about near misses, I think it's super important to define that term. So near miss is a very widely used, but I would argue a pretty loosely defined concept in the industry. You see people using lots of different kinds of things and referring to them as near misses. So let's, here's a nice cartoon showing a guy laughing at this falling box and thinking, oh, it was just a near miss, and not recognizing that whatever caused that first box to fall may be also causing other problems down the road. So let's talk about what a near miss is and what it isn't. So a near miss is a miss. It's when someone is not injured. It's when there is not equipment damaged or an accident or a trip to the hospital. It's literally a miss. It's when something almost happens. And I've heard it described as, not all near misses necessarily are the same. And the near misses, I think, that really have some voltage to them and are ones that we want to tune into, I have heard described as kind of those experiences outdoors that take your breath away, where something really remarkable almost happened, and through good luck or timing or fortune or some decision you made, it turns into a miss rather than a hit. Relevant near misses should stand out from normal, and we're going to do some activities here in a moment that help us tease that out a little bit more. And when we say that a relevant near miss should stand out from normal, normal varies not only from person to person, but program to program. Something that might be really common and mundane and typical in one program type or one environment might be really unusual and scary and inappropriate, for a different kind of program or population. So just pointing out, that it's important that you have a clear definition in your organization, your program, your sector of what that normal is and where a near miss begins. So let's ask OSHA what they think. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration they have a pretty useful definition of a near miss that I've seen outdoor programs adopt and use. And they like to say that a near miss is an occurrence in which no one was harmed, but in which injury could easily have occurred if there was a slight difference in timing or location. Tree falls right next to a tent, that is a near miss. Tree falls and hits that tent, that is an incident. So OSHA also calls near miss, they have other terms that they use, a close call, often used in the airline industry, we talk about that. A near collision is another term. And they also highlight that near misses can be accident precursors, meaning that they give us signals, they give us things to tune into, like that fellow in the cartoon here. This first falling box may be a precursor or a warning of an accident that's about to happen. So near misses aren't always accident precursors, and there's not necessarily a ratio or a correlation in every case. And that's how near miss reporting has often been kind of misused and misinterpreted. But I will say that if we can tune into the reasons why the near misses are happening and tune into the relevant near misses, then they can serve as accident precursors, which is really valuable for us. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's a widely misused term. I read a lot of online incident reports or stories or articles about accidents that have occurred, and I often see lines like this. I fell 40 feet into a crevasse and broke my leg, but I was rescued. I was fortunate to survive this near miss. A near miss doesn't mean that you survived. A near miss means that there was no injury. This was not, to me, this would not be a near miss. This would be an incident. Someone fell into a crevasse and broke their leg, right? So just want to highlight that when we're talking about near misses on this call, and when you get into some small group things to do, stuff like that, let's not misuse the term. Near misses are often underreported, and it's not uncommon for organizations to have incident reports that they get, and they're hearing about the big things and the major things, but they're really barely hearing about the near misses at all. They're chronically underreported. And so I would, before I dive into that, I would like to ask you, and before we do that, last point, just because something was a near miss doesn't mean that it wasn't an emotional hit. You know, a near miss can carry a lot of voltage and emotional impact and trauma. And near misses, even if it's a physical near miss, it could still be an emotional hit for someone. So just want to highlight that and not separate those things too much. So let's do poll number 2 and see where that takes us. Love to hear about what you do with near misses at your organization. If you could click on this, just give us a sense of how your organization approaches near miss reporting. That would be great. Do you folks see that poll? Great. You can scroll down and there's more options in the second category. All right. So we're going to give you just a little bit more time to wrap up this poll. There are more options in the second one if you just scroll down a little bit. Okay, let's go ahead and end this poll and share the results. Very interesting. So mostly we see people have a process for reporting near misses, but that very few are actually reported. And we're going to talk about that next. So perfect segue. Some organizations report that they don't have a mechanism for reporting near misses at all. And 23% say that they routinely report near misses and they have a vigorous culture of learning from them, which is wonderful. And we're going to talk more about the value of that and ways to get there. Part 2 is digging into the question of why not? If your organization isn't routinely reporting near misses, why do you think that might be? And there's a very interesting range of different reasons, but I find that this third one, where the paperwork and the reporting process is so cumbersome, why would people take the time and effort to report something that didn't even happen, right? And that the reporting mechanism itself can be one of the biggest barriers to this whole, ideal notion that we're going to report and learn from our near misses when we make barriers for that to even happen. So that's a really not a surprising answer. There's also one that I think is notable just above that, which is that people are afraid of getting in trouble or looking bad if they report a near miss. I had a close call driving the van today with a group of participants in the van. And I'm afraid that's going to make me look bad as a employee. So I'm just going to keep that hush hush, not talk about it. And that is something that can really be perpetuated by how an organization talks about and reports and responds to near misses when they occur. So I think that's a really common one, and we're going to throughout this webinar talk about the challenges of that, and some strategies for working with that more effectively. Great. So if we are ready to carry on, let's do that. And I'm going to close that poll. And we're going to keep going. So it is important for you, if you want to get to a place, if you're in one of those categories that isn't using your near misses as much as you'd like to, or maybe has no mechanism to report them at all, it's important first to define them like we did earlier, having some definition that you agree on for your organization, for your culture. And that's generally not enough, I have found. One of the most common challenges that we see organizations having around fostering this culture and this strategy of learning from near misses is, what's the difference between an incident and a near miss? Maybe your definition tackles that one, but then there's this other end of the spectrum, which is, what's the difference between a near miss and just business as usual? A tree falls 100 yards away while I'm hiking with a group of participants. Is that a near miss? My gut feeling for most organizations would be probably not, right? But how close does that tree need to be before it registers as not normal, reportable, something we need to think about, something we need to learn from, something we need to do differently? I see some heads nodding on the call. So that's very important to tease that out and to think about that really explicitly, so that you're not under-reporting near misses, but nor are you getting all these people reporting, hey, I saw a bear, a mile away, and it was a really close call, and maybe it wasn't. So here's a question for you, and you can just pop into the chat box what you think your answer would be. Is this an incident, i.e. an injury of some sort? Is this a near miss? Or is this just business as usual for your program, for the environments you operate in, for the participants you work in, for the kind of work that you do? Go ahead and just pop into the chat box. Incident, near miss, or not reportable. Or normal, you could say. Incident, near miss, or normal. And I'm going to open up the chat and just see what people are saying. It's really fun to see all these different answers, right? It's not an issue for some. It's a near miss for others. It's business as usual for others. This is really fun to see. In our part of the country, this would be a near miss. That's a great point. In some parts of the country, it might be really unusual, unexpected. You're not prepared for it. You don't have first aid kit to deal with that. For others, I see people from Texas writing in business as usual. This is not unusual. Others have more nuanced answers. It depends on how they found it, how they encountered it. Tell me a little bit more about what was happening. So as you offer examples like this to your staff, you can help them calibrate and hone in and get more clear, for themselves, if this would be a reportable incident or not. How about we add a little wrinkle? How about that snake rattles at a student unexpectedly just 2 feet away? Now let's pop into the chat box if that would be business as usual, a near miss, or an incident. And we're seeing, a lot more sort of leaning towards the near miss. I mean, almost universally, people are calling that a near miss. So that's interesting, right? Let's take a very different example and take a look at this. So imagine one of your staff members driving a van with participants on the way to a trailhead, and an elk runs out in front of the vehicle. The driver attentively slams on the brakes, comes to a stop. They narrowly miss that elk crossing the road. Everyone's wearing their seatbelts. No one's injured. Person was driving the speed limit to begin with. What do you say in your program? Maybe you don't have elk where you are. Maybe this would be a dog, or maybe it would be a coyote or something. But let's imagine a scenario like this. And I'm curious what you would say. Is this an incident? Is this a near miss? Is this just normal? Is this just like equipment working as it's intended to? Business as usual for some of you who operate in maybe a mountainous environment where this happens all the time. And there's nothing that you're going to do differently, right? As a result. I think that's a really key question in how you answer this question is, what would you do differently as the learning? What would you want people to take away from this incident? The report could be valuable to know the rate of elk encounters in the area, Ben points out very astutely. Let's complicate this one a little bit by just adding in one little wrinkle here. Whoops, here we go. I'm going to add in one little piece. Let's say the exact same scenario happened, but in this case, the driver was breaking one of your written policies by texting while driving, or distracted, or talking on the phone, or something that they weren't supposed to be doing. Now, would this be business as usual? Would this be a near miss, or would that convert it into more of an incident in your program? Let's see what you have to say about that. Now we're getting a lot of incident answers. And let me just ask anyone who would like to unmute themselves and speak up. Tell me why that would have shifted for you. Maybe Steve Creech, can I put you on the spot and ask you to just, because you gave a nice nuanced answer here, could you just speak up a little bit about your thinking around how this incident could be potentially classified?
Yeah, so what I put in was that it would kind of be both. So the fact that someone was texting while driving, we have a policy against that. So that would be, and when someone breaks a policy, that would be an incident, and because we would want to know what types of policies are people breaking. Is the policy appropriate? Does it need adjustment? But then I would say that it's also still important to know about wildlife crossings, so that as the near miss, so that we then have a better idea of, like, on this stretch of road, this is a really common thing, so have a heightened awareness there, type of thing.
Great, thanks so much, Steve. Good, yeah. Good nuance thinking about the value of kind of classifying it as both an incident from a policy perspective and a near miss from a physical injury or elk population perspective. So does this, and I did see a couple answers in the chat that were thinking about, this is a pretty serious infraction. There'd be consequences for this person. Maybe they'd be suspended from driving or terminated. And it's good, that you have distracted driving policies and you take that seriously. I wonder, for those people who had that answer, if it would change your view in any way, if this was like self-reported. This person turned themselves in. They said they came forward with that report. No one turned them in. They turned themselves in and came to you as the supervisor or the program director and said, hey, I just want to be upfront with you about, what happened. I was texting while driving and I almost hit an elk, but I didn't. And I just wanted to be, come clean about that. I'm wondering in the chat, or if anyone would like to speak about that, what your thoughts are around if that changes the scenario in any way.
I'd be happy to speak to this for a moment.
Great.
I know that with my staff, we have a culture of kudos and own-ups for the purpose of near misses. Near misses are something that might not be reported often, and so having the ability to openly discuss and take that learning moment for near misses can be really valuable to all staff.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. A couple nuanced answers also coming in on the chat that people might want to check out. We had an entire webinar last week with Josh Cole that was really about this topic of balancing safety and accountability and how to balance those competing things and not, you know, I think that kind of starts with the question of why. You know, why did you feel like you needed to be texting while driving or talking on the phone? And was it some work-related pressure that we had created that forced you into that situation to begin with, and not necessarily having a knee-jerk reaction to every time this happens, it's the worker's fault. There might be another part we could fire the worker, but we didn't necessarily fix the conditions under which they were feeling that pressure to begin with. So we might blame the person, but miss the bigger opportunity we have to learn from that as an organization. So the beauty of near misses is there are no injuries, there are no lawsuits, there are no you know, trips to the hospital. These are free lessons. These are cheap lessons and chances for us to learn and to correct the things that might be causing that worker to make some of those decisions and stuff like that. So anyway, Jeremy very beautifully states in the chat that this is a coachable situation that could elevate depending on your culture and your program policies and stuff like that. Richard adds that it's important to facilitate a culture of reporting near misses for the growth of the program. I really think, and Matt has a good question. He wants to know why they were texting, and that was getting to where I was going with that. So not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I really think, you know, if you want to promote an environment where people are reporting near misses, you have to be careful about then holding them accountable, automatically holding them accountable for what they divulge in those near misses, and take it on a real case-by-case kind of basis. Maybe they were texting the other vehicle to watch out for elk, Arturo says. Maybe they were actually trying to make things safer. Who knows? That's a really interesting point. Paul calls it a teachable moment. Appreciate all those great comments in the chat. And I think we've sort of addressed that issue. It's an interesting one. So in the spirit of this calibrating between incident, near miss, or normal, when Amberly and I worked together at the Student Conservation Association, actually, we came up with quizzes like this. And we would, as part of staff training, when new crew leaders were hired, we would offer them questions like this and ask them to tell us if this would be an incident or near miss or just business as usual, and hear from each other and do an exercise a lot like we've been doing here and talk through that. And you know, this is just one example. These examples may or may not really apply to the kind of program that you work in. But this is meant to give you an idea of like how to create a quiz like this and to help calibrate folks on thinking through, am I going to take the time to submit that incident or near miss report? Or is this just part of my job? You know, people are climbing on a top rope, you know, situation at a climbing site. Student slips, you know, as they're almost at the top and, you know, falls a foot or so, and the belayer catches them and lowers them safely to the ground. To me, that's not a near miss, right? That's called climbing. That's what they're supposed to be doing. And I think it's really important that for your organization, you define where the edges are between incident, near miss, and not reportable. Making quizzes like this can help. So there's a closer look at it. So really the key here, the point, I think you see the point I'm driving at, is really teaching them this, the definition and the relevance of near miss reporting. So let's move on to this interesting little piece where we're going to talk about the psychology behind all of this. And we're going to introduce a tool called the Jamboard, and Amberly is going to drop into the chat a link for you to click on. And if you click on that link, it will take you to this Jamboard tool. And I believe you should all see that on the screen now, right? Because I'm sharing the screen. So if you want to add your comments to the Jamboard, all you do is you go over to the left side and you grab this little sticky note. You can see you're going to add your ideas, and you can make your sticky note any color you want. And that's how you add your ideas to the Jamboard. And we would invite all of you to do that. There's also a second page of the Jamboard. If you go up to the top and you just toggle over like this, you can look at the second page, and there's more room for people to add their answers on that second page if the first page gets too full. So when you add your sticky note, they all go on exactly the same spot, and you need to drag it to an open spot. So please just make your sticky note, drag them. If you see another sticky note that's a lot like yours, maybe you could drag yours over there next to it. And we can all work together to kind of organize our thoughts here on the page. I'm seeing lots of great input coming from the Jamboard. This is really interesting. Try to drag yours over close to another one that resembles yours if you see one that's similar. We also have a second page of the Jamboard. If this page gets too full, page 2 here is wide open, so feel free to put some things on page 2. Nice. Okay, I think we're pretty full on page 1. So if people have more to add, if you could add them on page 2, that would be great. We have some sticky notes that are tilted at a rakish angle here. Very, very nice. All right, let's, ooh, lots of tilting happening now. Let's, thank you. Now I see some sticky notes coming into page 2. Thanks for that. So let's just stay on page 1 for a moment. And I want to invite you to take a moment and just skim through here and read some of these, and then we're going to chat. All right, and I have a little laser pointer, and when I use my laser pointer, you should see that show up on the screen. I think, you know, we see a lot of, I think, really understandable and common ones that we've chatted about to some extent, like, you know, lack of training is really common, the paperwork barrier, the lack of a definition, which I think we tackled with that quiz concept. They may not be seen as important as accidents. And that's really why we're having this webinar today. No culture of reporting. And we talked earlier about how you respond and how you treat someone after they submit a report helps to build that culture, right? If someone is afraid to submit a near miss report because they're going to get fired, that is a way that you have actually created a cultural learning disability, you know, in your organization. They're so busy with field work. They're so busy with their real job that they don't have time. I don't have near misses in mind, so it's not really something you're tuned into. This one at the very top, look at this one. Nothing ever happens with the near miss reports. It's really good to use actual near miss reports and actual trainings. So this is like both a problem and a solution here in that one. I think that's super important. Disagreement among staff about whether it was a near miss or not. These are all really great observations. More pieces here about people worried about being in trouble. Nervous about what would happen. They'd get into trouble again. These are all really great comments. Let's take a look at what's happening on page 2. Ooh, not my job. I like that. That's a mindset that people can get in. Nothing happened, so why worry? I think that is really what we're going to be talking about quite a bit here today. General aversion and allergy to paperwork of any kind. Management doesn't understand the program and realize that we need to think about this type of risk. I think that's a real underlying issue that can make near-miss reporting harder or impossible altogether. No process for reporting. And leadership needs to model this behavior. Thank you for whoever added that. Again, I think that goes to organizational culture. Wonderful comments on the Jamboard. We're going to come back to the Jamboard for another section near the end, where you're going to be invited to talk about your key takeaways or action steps or things you're going to do. So we'll come back to the Jamboard in a little bit. But for now, let's launch back into the presentation. And I'm going to keep going. So you brought up a lot of the reasons why near misses are often underreported in organizations. And I'm going to share with you some of the ones that we found by working in. Near miss reporting is kind of one of my pet strategies. It's one of my favorite things to focus on. I kind of see it as a gateway to creating organizational culture. I see it as a way to create and foster really positive risk assessment and proactive management, and fixing things before people are injured, et cetera. So when they're underreported, I think there's some strategies that we can use that are super important. So when near misses are underreported, human nature is often very much to blame. People want to avoid that discomfort or being the one who made a mistake, or they're having something like that. So I think it's just really common. There can be perceived hierarchies that are happening either in the small group or in the organization, or some kind of hierarchies that are making near miss reporting more difficult. Someone's going to look down on me. I'm going to get in trouble, something like that. There may be no clear process, or a really cumbersome multi-step process. Hey, a really simple thing happened. A really simple thing didn't happen. And I just want to have a way to document that and report it. And I don't want to fill out a 45-page, I don't have to click 45 boxes on this online reporting tool to tell you a simple story. Anxiety about being judged, especially in an organization where this may not be universally understood or part of your strategy. So what happens in those cases is like background conversations, hallway conversations, people talking about each other instead of talking in a foreground way, talking to each other about this serious thing that almost happened. Not seeing any benefit to the why would I do this? I submitted a near miss report last year about a really scary thing that almost happened, and nothing ever came of it. It went into a black hole. I never heard back. I never saw any change in policy or training, anything like that. So why would I do that again? I think that's a really important one. And as your Jamboard really showed, that fear of consequences, that we need to get in front of that. So let me share a cautionary tale, not from an outdoor program itself, but more an individual who was operating as an individual and had an experience that I think highlights a lot of these reasons why for anyone near misses could commonly be underreported. So a cautionary tale. This is an avalanche story. And a skier triggered an avalanche on a low hazard day, a pretty appreciable avalanche actually, and he submitted a report. After he submitted that report, he had this strange sense of feeling vulnerable to the judgments of others. He had that all too familiar twist in his gut when he second guessed posts on social media after he said something. The way people perceive misconduct, interesting word. He triggered an avalanche, no one was injured, but in his mind, that was like misconduct. on this low hazard day. And it can lead to this hushed atmosphere where we don't share, we don't open up, we don't make ourselves vulnerable, we avoid judgment from others, right? More on this, that anxiety that he was feeling. I wondered if I'd be ridiculed for not knowing the exact specifics, the slope angle or the facets, or for getting my terminology wrong. Maybe my line wasn't rad enough. Maybe I was exposing some secret by including the names of access and route lines that he was skiing. Maybe I was simply overreacting altogether. The same way Elise Sogstad had thought twice about pulling her airbag at Tunnel Creek on February 19, 2012. This was the famous Tunnel Creek avalanche where many people were caught and 3 people died here in Washington State back in 2012. For fear of being teased, at being frightened by what she at first considered a small slough. This is all from a wonderful article by Matt Hansen called Getting Beyond the Emotional Game of Reporting an Avalanche. And his point in this article is that we need to get better at responding positively and not being so quick to judge when someone reports a near miss. And I'm talking about online forums, Avalanche, centers, climbing, the Whipper of the Week takes place. And instead of saying, hey, thanks for sharing your learning, people are quick to jump on and judge and blame that person. And why would you want to be the next one, who reports that stuff? And I think we need to get better as an outdoor industry at looking at these near misses, not as cases to jump in and blame and shame, but as cases to say, this could happen to me. And I have something to learn from this. And this, thank you to this person for courageously coming forward and sharing their experience. So just a cautionary tale. Some of the benefits that we get from reporting near misses is we are harvesting information that would otherwise be unexamined. I like to say that near misses are lottery tickets that we've already paid for, and we may as well cash them in and see what we can learn from them. We can help others learn from our experiences so that we don't all have to repeat those same mistakes every time. If you'd like to hear one of my own, I like to practice what I preach. If you'd like to hear one of my own critical kind of incidents and close calls that I had in the mountains, you can listen to the Sharp End podcast, episode 25, and hear more about that and see what was actually happening in this picture here. Quite a harrowing story that I experienced back in the day. So without diving into that too much, let's keep going. And I'm going to offer a theoretical platform on which to base some of this. And those of you who are with us last week saw Josh Cole talk a little bit about some of these concepts, and I'm going to revisit them and I'm going to put them in a slightly different context here for us. So what causes accidents? What are the models that we use to think about the sequence of events or the factors or the narratives that we come up with to help us understand the cause of an accident? We're going to look at 3 different models, a linear model, a complex linear model, and then a systems-based way of thinking about it. So back in the 1930s, a gentleman named Heinrich wrote a pretty influential book that continues to really significantly shape how people talk about and think about accidents even today. And there are 2 images here I'm going to show that I think many of you will recognize, whether you knew that this came from Heinrich or not, or whether you recognized that this is how you are thinking about incidents. I think these 2 images really influence the way that a lot of us have been taught by our society to think about accident causation. So the first one is this pyramid that Heinrich came up with. And he studied many incidents that had been reported. And what he found was this interesting ratio where there was a lot of unsafe acts and conditions that were taking place, slightly fewer near misses, slightly fewer minor injuries, occasional severe injuries, and very occasionally fatalities. He presented the information in a variety of different ways, but basically this is Heinrich's triangle, and the way that it has been kind of used, and I would say misused, by safety researchers and occupational safety managers is to assume that if all we do is fix the things that are happening at the bottom layer, then we'll statistically prevent the top one from happening. And it's just not true. What is useful about this model is the high number of near misses that are occurring and the opportunity we have to tune into and report and learn from them. So that's what I hope you take away from Heinrich's triangle, is not that we need to focus all of our attention down here at the bottom and that will keep the tragedies from occurring. Instead, the real point is that there are lots of near misses that are happening all the time, and we can either pay attention to them or not. It's up to you. But if you pay attention to them, you're going to have a lot more data to work with and a lot more opportunities to understand what's really happening. So that's a useful thing from Heinrich's triangle. Here's another piece that Heinrich gave us, this idea of dominoes. Accidents happen in this linear fashion. One domino leads to the next, leads to the next. Heinrich named the dominoes with things like, environmental factors, unsafe acts, human error, accident occurring, injury taking place. And the idea behind the domino model, and I think a lot of us think about accidents this way, is that we just need to find the domino that's broken. We need to find the one thing that's wrong in this linear model, and we need to intervene. We need to fix that. We need to fire that person. We need to write a new policy. We need to put the right training and equipment in place, and that will keep this linear domino model from causing harm. So this is a very linear way of thinking about accident causation that Heinrich introduced, and he literally used drawings of dominoes, in his book in the 1930s, which is fun to Google and look at his original drawings of that. Moving up into the 1980s, James Reason wrote a very dry and boring book, but a brilliant book, Managing the Risk of Organizational Accidents. And one of the great, many good things came from that book, but one of the most famous and well-known one is this Swiss cheese model of accident causation. And many of you are familiar with this already, but the idea is that there's a hazard represented by this little ball at the upper right corner. And in order for that hazard to become an injury, it needs to penetrate all the way through the holes in the Swiss cheese. And the holes in the Swiss cheese need to line up so that it will do that. So, the Swiss cheese represents both latent conditions in the organization and then active failures or active decisions that individuals are making. So latent things might be training, procedures, what kind of environment you're working in, things like that. What are your hiring practices? Active things might be more like supervision, or the equipment, was it working at the time? Decisions that the workers were making, things like that. And only when all these factors line up does that turn into an injury. So this is useful in the sense that it invites us not just to look closest to the accident, but to look upstream, to look at all the things happening in an organization upstream of that incident, right? However, you'll notice, as this line indicates, that it is still quite a linear model. This is still very much a linear process where really what we need to do is add more Swiss cheese, smaller holes. Let's keep this thing from getting out of control. And I have seen even more recently a version of this Swiss cheese model applied to COVID-19 and our global response to it. And there was a little misinformation mouse that was in the model, chewing the edges of the Swiss cheese and making the holes bigger and enlarging the opportunity for bad things to happen. The misinformation mouse. So you might check out that. COVID-19 Swiss cheese model, if you want to see an interesting application of that. So we've talked about linear, we've talked about this complex linear, and let's move down to the final one that I think it represents more how we are thinking today. Here you can see Reason's old Swiss cheese model. We're going to replace it with a new image in just a second. Many authors have written about this systems way of thinking, but the whole idea is that accidents are really not linear and that they can't be prevented by simple linear thinking. Add a new policy, add a piece of equipment, fire a worker. Those are linear solutions to something that is actually not a linear cause. So rather than looking at it like this perfect, linear Swiss cheese, we're going to replace that with something a lot more dynamic, and the interactions between the layers of Swiss cheese and the interactions between the hazards themselves create new risks that were not there to begin with. Great example, we can manage the risk of COVID-19 by requiring all of our participants to drive separately to the trailhead, right? So we've managed that linear risk. However, we've now got 20 or 30 tired drivers on the road doing what might be one of the most statistically hazardous things in our program. So we haven't fixed that problem by linear thinking. We've actually, that solution that we created bounces around and creates new hazards, as shown by this image. In this way of thinking, then near misses are really these weak signals that we can either tune into and listen to and learn from, or we can ignore them, much to our peril. In this way of thinking, the difference between, with this dynamic piece happening, the difference between a tragedy and just a normal event can be very slim. Dr. Sidney Dekker, who is one of my favorite authors on safety research, he likes to say that death does not arise from some failure, a sudden domino that has failed, or a sudden piece of Swiss cheese that has been penetrated. Death does not arise from failure. It hides in success. It hides in our failure to tune into and pay attention to how these programs are running in normal time, and listening to those near misses and listening to those weak signals that might be giving us clues. I love this phrase. It's a little scary, but it's I think it's really useful, actually. So I think the best example that I could offer of this idea of that we're talking about is the Gulf of Mexico BP oil spill that occurred, and that as some of you I'm sure famously know, that oil platform had 7 years of perfect safety ratings and no injuries and accidents reported, and very good safety record leading up to this tragedy that was a big environmental problem, as well as some lives were lost in that incident. And the opportunity that they had to learn from that and not take past success as a guarantee of future success, and tuning into, are we really reporting and learning from the right things? Does our 7 years of perfect safety record, did that help us prevent this tragedy? So there's a closer look at that famous story. And I think it's interesting to look at it through this lens of incident and near miss reporting. So if you look at this model overall, with linear at the top, complex in the middle, and systems at the bottom, up here, the more linear we are, the more simple we look at accidents, and the more simple of a solution we want to find. Down here, we're looking at more complex ways of thinking. Up here, we're blaming people. We're blaming individuals. Down here, we're actually learning. Sidney Dekker, again, says that you can either blame or learn. You can either blame or learn, but you can't do both. And up here, we're finding broken components and we're fixing those broken components. And down here, we're really understanding what's actually happening in this story. So I hope that this little academic dive into accident causation is as interesting to you as it is to me. Maybe not, but I find it to be a really fascinating way to look at and understand this stuff, because this brings us back into near miss reporting again, and how that can be a useful tool. Up here, the reason this image, by the way, is an iceberg, is up here above the waterline. These are the things that we see typically in our outdoor programs, and they're things like dramatic events, big incidents that are reported, major things that draw a lot of our attention. A serious incident occurs. We pay a lot of energy and attention to that. Underneath the surface are subtleties, little things that are occurring, near misses, deeper stories, blind spots that can be submerged and hidden from us if we don't create a mechanism to tune into and learn from those things. So let's take a look at this. And I'll give you a second to digest what's going on here. This is a bell curve showing all of the different, let's imagine 1 year of your program being delivered and all of the different days that that program is happening. The planned outcome in the middle, occasional unwanted outcomes or incidents or problems, and occasional really positive surprises, at the far end. But for the most part, things go well. For the most part, things work as intended. Traditional approaches to safety will use only this small little red portion of the reporting and understanding what's happening, because they're only reporting and learning from this tiny little shred of information, the car wrecks, the serious injuries, maybe the fatalities that occur. We often focus so much attention on this little red piece that we forget about all the rest. We don't ask, rather than asking this question of what has gone wrong, we fail to ask, why did the others go right? What can we learn from all these successes that we're having? And I would argue, back to the theme of today's talk, that near misses are right in here. Near misses are right down there at that edge, almost an unwanted outcome, but something that didn't happen because of equipment or tools or luck or good decisions that were made or some training that you provided. Something turned that incident into just a near miss. Why? And if we can study those near misses a little bit more, that's a pathway into understanding this bigger piece of data, this larger part of the story. And it gives us something much more rich and useful to do. Rather than asking what went wrong and only studying that, asking also what went right. If I wanted to understand what makes a happy marriage, how could I do that? By only looking at cases that ended in divorce, right? So why, in our understanding our programs, do we only look at, the things that have gone wrong? I think near misses are a chance for us to start turning that around and opening up that lens a little wider. So what's next for us? I would like to, let me take a look at how we're doing on time. I'm really curious how you apply some of the concepts that we've talked about here today. And I'm going to invite you to join your colleagues on this call in little, really small groups of 3. And if we could do that let's do that for let's give you about 7 minutes to be in those groups. And then we'll come back together. We'll hear from some of you. We'll invite you to unmute yourselves and share some of the learning from those small breakout groups. And Amberly is going to launch those breakout rooms and invite you into those rooms. Really, this is the question we want you to discuss in the breakout room. It's how can your organization get better at learning from near misses? You're all going to be in different places and contexts and have different things to say about this. So invite you to brainstorm with your colleagues. We'll do that for about 7 minutes, and we'll come back and see what ideas you all came up with. So, Amberly, whenever you're ready, go ahead and launch those breakout rooms. Great to have you back. I hope that was an interesting little chance just to chat and collaborate with folks that you do or do not know. I would love to hear from a handful of you, like something that you took away from that conversation, something that's a unique way for your organization to get better at learning from near misses. And just, I'll open up the floor and invite some courageous people just to speak up. And if no one does, I'm going to call on a few people.
If no one minds, I can start.
Please do.
So I work at a school, a high school, doing outdoor education. And what my project has been for the last couple of years, last 2 years or so, is moving a lot of our stuff online, getting rid of a lot of paper waivers and going back and forth and just trying to simplify things. And now that I've got the main program stuff working online, I've been shifting, and just this week, before I even thought about doing this webinar, started moving our guide materials online, including our paperwork with the post-trip reports and near misses and all of that. We've always had a near miss section for sure, but making things as simple as possible so that guides can fill it out on their phone on their way back, just making it just straightforward as can be, instead of getting back and getting a piece of paper and then having to do more work. And then talking in my breakout room made me realize that much of my work when I'm out on the field and doing a 5-day trip, for example, that's the job for me. So getting home and doing paperwork at the end is not what I feel like is the job, and I neglect it. And so by making it as just straightforward and as simple as possible and moving it online has hopefully will be an answer to that.
Wonderful, Jake. Thanks so much for sharing that. It's a really good start. Who else would like to build on what Jake was saying or add something different?
Jason Willett here from the Washington Conservation Corps. And kind of an opposite perspective, I realize that we don't get a lot of reporting because we're using this ancient accident reporting form that's word-based, that predates, a lot of our online capabilities. And so for our crew supervisors in the field, they've got to fire up their laptop at the work truck using an iPhone as a hotspot if they have cell service, and fill out the form electronically. And it's really clunky because it's just really outdated. And so a suggestion was made by Ryan from Montana Wilderness School. They still use paper forms, and they made a nice simple one that someone can just fill out by hand, take a snapshot of it and send it in. I think that could make a huge difference for us, is just old schooling it a little bit and, having people carry a few paper forms or something like that, just to make it a little more accessible. So that was really useful.
Awesome, Jason. That's great, really practical examples. And yeah, you're totally right. Like we can't make this, we've already outlined all the ways that there's human factors that make this hard to do. We can't create organizational barriers that make it even harder, right? So really appreciate those examples. What else? How else can your organizations get better at learning from near misses?
Hey, Chris Anderson here. I work for REI. I think one of the biggest pieces that we have felt like in the past we've forgotten about is how important the feedback loop continuing back into the field staff is on kind of reinforcing the behavior, right? So you can make all the steps in the world to know that behind the scenes we're addressing this information and we're taking it seriously. And the only time that you're going to transparently share this, if you don't otherwise have a process, is if you make big programming changes and explain why. But to continue to see, I think a major uptick in this type of reporting, getting the feedback that you're considering this stuff, taking time with it, and then sharing it back in order to learn from it. Sometimes it's not so much of a programming change that's needed, but just an awareness. Like sometimes it's an environmental factor, and just having the near miss shared out between teams that are going to the same location is enough to change that domino, right? Or intersect or add that layer of Swiss cheese, right? Where you have enough people that just go, oh yeah, I go down that same ladder every time, or I go up, scramble up that same cliff, man, I should be aware of that. And so having that share out, and then a tactic that that I really have believed in is, where appropriate, I'll often, we'll do like a management review, but when it's time to share it out to teams, assuming that they're okay with it, I'll have the actual guide take on the role of sharing that out to their team, as opposed to it coming down from management. And what I've found is that often automatically skates any assumption that we're throwing somebody under the bus, or that we're doing it without their permission or knowledge, or trying to be creative by removing the guide involved, and just have them share out the incident that they reported as a near miss, and sort of a conversational tone of like, hey guys, watch out for this while you're out there too, because it happened to me. And we do a little, there's some work we do with them to make sure that comes out in an appropriate manner and communicates what we need to, but kind of, I think, supports that safety or the safe space mindset of like, hey, everyone should feel good about reporting this type of information.
Chris, those are really nuanced, excellent examples. And I hope people tuned into some of like the real care and the intentionality. What I'm hearing you describe is not a mindset where you're saying who broke a rule and what punishment should they get. What I hear you describing is what happened and what can we learn from it? What can we take away? How can we keep that from happening in the future? That takes us down a very different track than, who can we blame? So I think that's really excellent, perspective that you shared. So thank you for that.
And one thing, just as a follow-up related to that, Chris, is I guess be humble enough to dig deep enough, and maybe you can create a better policy or procedure out of that literally comes from a near miss. I can name instances where that has actually happened, and instead of just talking about it and okay, well, we've done our, they reported it, we've talked about it, but in some instances you can actually make actual policy or procedure changes and be okay with that. And maybe even when you get to that point where, where you're going through some of the policy, you can say, hey, this one was a result of a near miss that occurred. So I guess just giving yourself permission to make those changes that might need to be made.
Yeah, and to your point, Richard, with what you brought up earlier, Steve, is the example of texting during driving. Like, there's every opportunity for you to have designed a program that puts that type of pressure on your staff, right? And it, the larger of an organization you have, it might be multiple teams. One team's designing a program, the other team's inlaying the safety requirements, the other team's inlaying reporting, and like all of that doesn't come together with one person looking at it. But meanwhile, you have the guy in the field who's like, I'm supposed to get from A to B in 1 hour, keep these people happy and safe, and also give you an update, but then also report my location, or whatever it is. And sometimes those reports can make you step back from that higher view and go, oh yeah, we did set up a situation for failure here. And, that goes a long way to your staff too. And just being able to admit that, like, hey, we looked at this and we're making this change because it's clearly not a reasonable request that we've made, and it's putting people into dangerous situations. So absolutely.
Yeah, beautifully stated. And another example is, we want you to report all these things, but we're not going to pay you for a single minute after you get the group safely back to the trailhead. So people are either reporting, on their own time, on their own dime, or your organization is actually creating, seeing it as part of their job to debrief the course afterwards, to take the time to do the necessary paperwork, to foster the kind of learning that you want. And so all those things could be like, barriers that make it harder for you as a program manager to know what's really happening in the field. These are great contributions. Does anyone else have something you'd like to add in here? Another way your organization could get better at learning?
Hey, Steve, Malik here.
Hey.
I think that it's important to highlight that near misses can also be very traumatic depending, and that you should build out sort of that level of compassion or nurturing with the people involved afterwards so that they can process it, whatever that looks like, in terms of your policy and core competencies. But yeah, near misses we think of it's just like, oh, somebody almost rolled their ankle or, but they can be, yeah, obviously speaking from experience too, that they can be pretty traumatic, and, you gotta follow up with folks. So just wanted to offer that.
Thank you so much for adding that, Malik. I think that's incredibly important, that we not just avoid punishment, but that we actually foster healing from things like this. If you go back to the dominoes, you go back to the William Heinrich, or the Heinrich model that I showed, there can be a tendency to, in the wake of a serious near miss or an incident, we can ask, what rule was broken, who is to blame, and how bad should the punishment be? That can be one mindset. Or we could ask, who has been hurt? What do they need? Whose job is it to provide that? And that's a type of accountability that's very different than the accountability down. It's an accountability, as opposed to an accountability up to management, it can be an accountability down to the people at the ground level and taking care of them in the wake of the emotional trauma that can come from something that almost happened or a really scary thing that occurred. So I think we've really, thank you, Julia. I think in our kind of traditional way of risk management and safety practices, that mindset wasn't present. And Malik really rightly reminds us about the importance of that. And I think that's super important for near miss reporting. If people can't safely report something that didn't happen, how in the world do you expect them to report to you, the more serious things that are happening? So I think that we need to make safer spaces for that to happen. We have just a few minutes left, and I'd like to move on to one final piece here. And if you had something, that you wanted to add in this section, there's going to be a chance for you to do it here at the end. So a couple things that I just want to briefly cover. How can your organization get better at learning from near misses? And let's broaden that out a little bit more. How can we as an outdoor industry, how can we as an outdoor community of people get better at fostering a safe space for near misses to be learning opportunities and not blaming and shaming opportunities? So I think personal habits, some things that we can do, whether it's a personal trip or a part of your program or whatever, context, explore your assumptions about accident causation. Are you in that domino mindset, or can you imagine a more systems-based, a more complex way of looking at the causes of accidents? Debriefing, not just when things have gone wrong, not just when someone has been injured, not just when someone's in trouble, but debriefing what went right on this trip. There's a nice example of a checklist here from Avalanche Education Organization that talks about, things we can learn, every time we go out, not just when things have gone wrong. Identifying those near misses, courageously sharing them, focusing on learning, a mindset of learning, not blaming, and you sharing your stories with folks on that regard. So those are some personal habits. Let's look at like social media. As we all know, social media has its real upsides and downsides. And if any of you have seen the Social Dilemma documentary, it pretty clearly shows what the downsides are. I do think that social media can be used well. And, if we could get better at creating safe spaces, for learning instead of shaming and blaming in social media, it would go a long way. And as a follow-up to this webinar, I'm going to share with you some ideas I have about that. So finally, let's use the existing platforms that we do have. Things like, if this is just pulled from an outdoor program's public-facing website, and it's reminding all of their volunteer members to report near misses. Do report even seemingly minor near misses. It might just help prevent someone else from having a similar accident. So let's use the existing tools that you do have. In the poll we did at the beginning of this, many of you said that you have some near miss reporting methodology at your program, but no one uses it. So let's use the tools you do have. Listening to things like the Sharp End podcast, and Ashley does a really great job on that, of trying to change this culture where people blame and aren't safe, sharing their mistakes, and really turn it into more of like a learning opportunity. Finally, there's things like, the near miss survey. There's things like this for all different kinds of outdoor activities, not just climbing. And I would encourage you to check out things like that. There's a great one for firefighting, actually, that I get little weekly reports about the firefighting near miss of the week, things like that. And really, the bottom line for all this stuff is, does it work? Is this just like a neat idea, that Steve has, a good idea, but something that doesn't really work? Well, I can tell you that it really does work. And I'll share with you some data from an organization that took this approach that we're describing, defined near misses, created a culture where they're learning instead of blaming, showing people that their near miss reports are really being utilized and converted into meaningful learning. This organization took a very intentional approach to near miss reporting. And this is a major outdoor program with students in all 50 states. And what they found is, over the course of 5 years, you can see the near miss reports that they were getting multiplied tenfold. You might, in the old mindset, in the William Heinrich mindset, you might ask yourself, what in the world were they doing wrong? Something awful must be happening at this organization. They went from only 16 near misses all the way to 168. What was wrong with those people? And in fact, if you come back to the iceberg model, those 168 were there all along. They just weren't being reported, right? They just simply weren't talking about them. And you can see this nice gradual progression over the 5 years where people started to learn it's okay to talk about near misses. It's okay to learn from them. It's actually part of our job, to report these things and to learn from them. And so what it represents to me is 168 opportunities that they had to understand what was really happening, to correct some things that could be wrong, and to make a safe space for people to learn from each other's experience rather than having to make those mistakes themselves. So I'm proud of this data, and I think you can find lots more like this if you look. So I realize we're getting pretty near the end of our scheduled time, but I want to make space for those of you who have time and can stay with us. I want to make space for just a few things. Come back to Sarah Carpenter's quote. The world of snow and avalanches, or outdoor education, is a wicked learning environment, and we don't get feedback every time we go out. I would argue that we can change that. We can get feedback. We can reflect. We can debrief. We can report near misses and share the learning with each other. We can change that. And I really would like to pop into the final Jamboard now. And Amberly's just dropping the link again into the chat. And I'm going to invite you in that final Jamboard to share your key takeaways from this workshop today. One action step, one thing you're going to do differently, one thing that is kind of a key learning for you, however you'd like to interpret this question. And let's just have a flurry of sticky notes here. There is a second page as well. If the first page gets too full, we can go to page 4. Yeah, please go ahead and drop your takeaways in the Jamboard here and drag it to an open spot. Seeing some great ideas coming in to the chat, into the Jamboard rather. To learn and not blame. Thank you. Defining incidents, near misses, and normal. Super important. Adding a section on near misses to your training. Quarterly incident report roundup with team. I like that. What went right? Stress to the leadership that risk management is important for my program. Thank you. Absolutely. All right, good stuff. What I'm going to do, feel free to keep this Jamboard open for yourself, but I'm going to convert it into a PDF and send all of you the PDF, you know, the record of what we had on our Jamboard after I clean it up a little bit. So you'll get that as a follow-up to this session. Anything you see on the Jamboard here that anyone would like to just unmute yourself and comment on? Do not be afraid to report. You might save someone else's life. That's a really, that might be like the opening quote or the closing quote perhaps for this whole workshop.
Yeah, I'll just add something. My takeaway is that perhaps it's time to change the terminology from near misses, which if you go back to your Heinrich model is a derivation or derivative of that, and go to something which is, let's say, more positive or neutral. I mean, I hate to play the terminology game because every time you say near miss, that implies accident, that implies something bad. But maybe it's time to change the terminology to potential unwanted energy transfer or something.
Yeah. I hear exactly what you're saying, Bob. That's great. Something that isn't about
something bad.
Yeah, framing it as avoiding something bad, but actually going towards something good. Wonderful idea. Let me know. Shoot me an email if you have some thoughts on how we can do that or what some of those terms might be. I love that idea, Bob. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris here again. I would say, you know, we all have a lot of work to do within our organizations, but I think within the community, there's a ton of work that could be done to expand communication between organizations. And I think especially our incident reporting data is often held really, really tight as something we want to keep quiet and keep within our organization, and certainly not sharing a bunch of private details, but I think there's real opportunity to benefit from someone else's near misses, just like we could benefit from our own. So I think expanding that space a little bit, there's an opportunity for that in the future.
100%, Chris. I'm going to share at the end in the follow-up email that you all get some thoughts about ways we can create some of those communication platforms, you know, between programs. Super important. I see just some great things on this Jamboard, and still a culture of trust. Use the owning up and kudos examples. I like having the field staff deliver the learning and even offer training to others. As long as that's not in like a blaming kind of way, or, you know, like they're being shamed in some way, I think having staff report on their own near miss can be a really powerful thing to do if they want to do it. They shouldn't be pressured into doing it, but if they want to do it. Make sure field leaders can report incidents from their phone. You know, let's knock down those barriers that make this stuff complex. What else do we see? Be the cultural change. I like that. Mahatma Gandhi kind of thing. Model for field staff. Make sure they understand that we're hearing and incorporating their feedback. It's not just going into the hole. It's really something that's being utilized, and it's an important part of their job. Wonderful stuff. Well, I'll let you keep adding to the Jamboard as you wish, but just kind of coming back to our final slide here and wrapping things up. If you'd like to hear more about, you know, webinars like this in the future, you can follow us on various social media. You can go to my website and subscribe, and that way you'll get announcements about things like this in the future. I sent out an announcement about this webinar to everyone that was subscribed, so you can do that. You can join us on the Experiential Consulting Facebook page. We have an Instagram, naturally. You can become, my third and fourth followers on Twitter, perhaps. And we'd love to just stay connected with all of you. Amberly dropped into the chat already a link to the feedback form for this session, and we would really value your feedback and comments. You'll get that as a follow-up email as well. So what you'll get after this session is a recording, some of the resources like the Jamboard and a feedback form, and we really appreciate your comments and your feedback. And in wrapping things up here, I'll just say thank you so much. Like, what a fascinating conversation. What a great group to talk with, and just really appreciated everyone's great ideas and comments and energy and all the different ways in which your organizations are already doing a lot of this stuff well, as we heard, and ways that you can learn from each other and fine tune and do it better. I think near miss reporting is one of the greatest chances we have to build the culture that you want at your organization, that's going to not just find simple answers and blame people and fix perceived broken components, but actually understand what's happening, what's going right, how can we do more of that, and how can we learn from each other's experiences so we don't have to repeat those same things, and to take care, as Malik reminded us, to take care of your people when these things do happen. On that note, I think I'll just wrap it up and turn it back over to Amberly, and really appreciate everyone's great comments and participation in the webinar today. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, folks, for joining today. Please do fill out the feedback form, as we mentioned. Do we have any questions? I know that we're about 9 minutes over. Just wanted to open it up. And I did see some really interesting things. Bill, if you're still on, thank you so much for your question. I think that's something that I'm going to ask Steve to address, perhaps in his follow-up. And Tara, your question as well. So we'll hopefully have that as a follow-up in his email.
I'm happy to chat about it real quick right now, if you want to just remind me of what those questions were.
Sure. So Bill has an idea about trying to set up an anonymous way for folks to submit near miss reports either during or after sort of a program season to gauge his near miss culture. And that's a really interesting thing, and maybe you can speak to that now.
That's great. I think that you could do that. You could have like a multi-stage approach where like stage one was sort of an assessment of what are they not reporting and why not, and if you could make something like that and point out the gap between, hey, this is so great, that you shared these 25 near misses with us, but wouldn't it have been even better if you had felt safe to do so in the moment so that we could have fixed these things earlier during the program season, be more agile with that and really use that as a platform to encourage more of that in the future. So I would see it as kind of a multi-stage approach. What I wouldn't want to do is have that be the norm where every season, we wait till the end of the season and then we come clean. And everyone, as they're packing up and getting ready to leave, it's like, well, now let me tell you what really happened. So I think it could be a valuable way to show people the difference between, what's getting reported and what could get reported, but I wouldn't want that to become the norm where we wait till the end of the season, to share that kind of stuff.
And part of that too is advocating for space and time, paid time of your staff to have the opportunity to sit down and report those things instead of, as Steve mentioned, them having to do it on their own time, on their own dime.
Yeah, great point.
And Tara asks if anyone has a really great incident reporting or near miss reporting process. There were folks that contributed to that in the chat, but Steve, maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, I have seen so many different iterations of incident and near miss reporting tools. And for the most part, much like a med form, a lot of med forms, as Amberly has taught us in the past, are the same, and they arise from some similar origins. And a lot of incident and near miss report forms are really like cookie cutter versions of the same things. And many of them create structural barriers in terms of actually filling those things out. One of the biggest challenges I see is the incident report form can be set up for the worst case scenario, where you have to enter so much information that would be really valuable information if someone died. But if you have to fill out every one of those 100 different check boxes or pull down lists or drop down menus, just to simply say a dog ran out in front of the van, we almost hit it, let's refresh people about the importance of this in training, you're not going to fill out that 100 page, or 100 item form. So I think it's important to make a near miss reporting methodology that is as simple as possible and allows people to maybe answer 5 questions, where were you, who are you, what happened, what should we learn from it, something like that. And give space for the program supervisors to follow up with that person if there's additional info that they need, rather than making them run the gauntlet, of an unbelievably ornate, complex process, just to report what should be a very simple story. I'm not sure if that really pinpointed exactly where the question was going, but those are some common issues, that I see. And you might check out, if you want to see a pretty really intentionally designed piece of software that's for the outdoor industry in incident reporting, you could go to incidentanalytics.com, and we can share that link in the chat or as a follow-up. And they've designed, some incident and near miss reporting software and analysis tools that really do target the outdoor industry, and you might be interested in checking that out.
And just a reminder that when discussing near miss reports, it doesn't have to be in this presentation classroom style. It's really great to integrate this into training. When your experienced veteran staff are driving to the base camp or the training site to say, hey, right here is a deer crossing. We constantly see other vehicles, not our vehicles, other vehicles, slam into deer right here. So take it easy on this curve. And that knowledge is then passed down more in a really peer-to-peer story type way, instead of a look at these near miss reports, which can be really good transfer of information.
That's a great example of culture, creating organizational culture where that's normal, for people to be sharing that kind of stuff. How about any other just extemporaneous questions or comments from anyone?
Chris here. I was starting to type out a question and it got really long, so I figured I'd ask. I feel like with actual incidents, there's kind of a backstop often, at least in my segment of the industry, to unreported incidents, which is like if there's truly an incident and a guide doesn't report it, we're probably going to hear about it from a customer or participant anyway. So generally, we're thinking about the idea that a decline in incidents across a season is a positive thing, right? It seems like we're getting the reports that we should. I think there's a solid connection there, but with the easy thing is to say that the more near miss reports, the better. But is there any attempt to try to look at what like a healthy percentage of near miss, data is, so that, I know it's a really tough line, but is anyone trying to look at what a healthy amount of reporting is for an organization where you're in that sweet spot of reporting things that really help drive change, but we're not wasting time in the nitpicky reports of things that don't matter?
If others, there's a lot of smart people on this call, and if others want to jump in and add your thoughts on this question, I would love to hear what you have to say. I'll give a quick response, which is, I don't know if there is some, magic ratio. One of the problems with Heinrich's triangle is it implied this ratio, this fixed ratio, and it drives us to blame the workers, cut down on the unsafe acts, if we knock down the near misses, then we'll prevent the fatalities. And as the BP oil spill showed, that's not true. Just by suppressing those little things doesn't prevent the big things from happening. There's no correlation. There's no statistical correlation between, knocking down unsafe acts and near misses and preventing fatalities. The things that cause them can be very different. Having said that, I would say that I have never come across an outdoor program that I felt was over-reporting near misses. All those human factors we described and all those organizational barriers that we described work together. That's why I'm showing this iceberg on the screen right now. There are always going to be blind spots, stuff under the surface. Near misses are our gateway into that. And the more we can do to promote, an environment where people can recognize them, report them, learn from them, the better. I also think that it's possible, I have seen some really irrelevant near misses reported. I saw something happen far away and I just thought I would report it, and someone really diligently caring and trying to do their job. But, the difference for me is there something actionable about this near miss? Are we going to do something different as a result? Is there something to be learned? Was this a potentially very severe thing that almost happened, a high potential incident that didn't happen? Is there something really, is there voltage to this near miss or not? And if you're getting a whole bunch of near miss reports for their own sake that you don't know what to do with, and that there's no real learning that can come from those, I have two thoughts. One is congratulations, because you've really created an environment in which it's safe for people to report near misses, and you've got a nice problem. This is a nice problem to have. The next thing then is just to make sure that it's serving its intended purpose and that it's giving you a chance to really understand what's happening, know what's going right, not just define it as going away from the bad stuff, but define it as going towards the good stuff, pursuing, the positive things that are going to make your program successful and safe. So, that's my thought around that ratio question that as I interpreted your question. And I'd love to hear if others on the call have something different that they'd like to say. All right, well, not hearing anything on that. Chris, do you feel like that answered your question a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
All right, folks. Well, thanks so much for your participation today. Look for those recordings and resources in your email, and have a great rest of your day.